USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
My background is I grew up on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania, and literally a week before high school graduation, I set my life course in the Navy. I went down to a joint recruiting station in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, and truly the only recruiter out there was the Navy recruiter at lunchtime. And so I was kind of earmarked to go in the Army because of my granddad and his service. But literally, in 1985 is when I decided to enlist in the Navy. Got the signature from my dad because I was still a little below 18 years old. And the week after high school graduation is when I shipped out. I mean, frankly, I wasn't really propense to serve in the military. I knew about my granddad's experience. He was a World War II Battle of the Bulge survivor, the 106th Infantry, Charlie Company. They met, the Germans met them in the first push of the Bulge, and their company was lost for about 3 weeks. And so they scattered throughout, and he was the guy in charge of bringing everyone back together, individual by individual. So I can just imagine the camaraderie, certainly in an environment as World War II presented itself. And folks from everywhere across the country coming together, in volunteer or not so volunteer, doing the nation's bidding. And so he always struck me as one that I was just incredibly proud of, but I truly didn't understand what he actually did until I actually joined the Navy and understood better about what exactly the service and sacrifice meant. But he's been my hero since day one. And on my every time I've had a ship's cabin as a captain of a ship, or in my office today, I've got his Bronze Star from that 1949 award that he got for when he was given that by the President and the War Department. That tells you how long that is. I couldn't be more excited to carry on his legacy for our family, but also for our nation. And so I enlisted as a Machinist Mate nuclear engineer for our Navy, and then I had a great opportunity to be able to get nominated and then to the Naval Academy and graduated in 1991, and that then started my commissioned service. Since then, I've had 7 different commands, anywhere from a mine sweep to destroyers to carrier strike groups, expeditionary strike groups, task force in Singapore, and then my current job is just wonderful. So I get to be in charge of Military Sealift Command, headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. 140 ships on a good day. On a better day, we scale out, well beyond that. And roughly, 10,000 civilian mariners and sailors and civilian servants that go out there and do the nation's work. I mean, it's roughly 140 ships that provide the DoD's supply chain at sea, and it's been doing that roughly for the last 75 years. That we use for the support of our defense logistics chain, whether in all supply chains, whether it's bulk ammunition, fuel. We operate, manage, and lead all of those ships, roughly 140, to make sure that we are keeping in step with our DoD ships at sea, making sure that we're able to line up and support cargo movements across the globe. Based on the call from TRANSCOM, U.S. Transportation Command at Scott Air Force Base. I'm the component commander, the Maritime component commander for General Reed for the greater, transportation for DoD. So it's this incredible orchestration of how we put our supply chain for the DoD for making sure that we are present, we deter, and if called upon, that we're able to act and win frankly. And so we're sort of that projection force of support to be able to do that for our combative arms. Not a small job,
No.
but really exciting job. It really is. Our family has moved 27 times across, the globe, frankly. But I think our overseas time has been the most important. And you can imagine my generation of military, a lot of it is in the Middle East, based on where the nation took us and where the global events, took us. I truly started falling in love about how do we keep choke points open, frankly. And even my earliest days, I was part of Operation Sharp Guard, and that was basically supporting the embargo against former Yugoslavia. And this is back in 1992 on my first ship. And I spent that first ship, I was a boarding officer. So every time a ship would come, sort of in our sector, if you will, we would board it, understand it had the right paperwork, it was going to the right destinations, it wasn't going into former Yugoslavia. And so I boarded, I would say no less than 300 vessels. All merchant, all, folks just doing their business, some not, and we caught them, and we were getting after it. And so, but I got to learn, one, how tall the ladder is, from the waterline up to the deck. And so got a good workout in, but bottom line is I quickly learned about international, trade, the mariner, and then how to secure it and how important it is and why we have a Navy. And we're seeing the same thing. And so you can imagine throughout my time in the Middle East, most of my tours were centered around being a task force commander for Middle East forces. And so we would do the protection and security for all of that $2.7 trillion that goes through the Bab el-Mandeb. And today's environment where Houthis are taking more control of that, obviously, for world events here. But, we've got to protect that. That's the international norms that my granddad fought for, right, way back in World War II. And so it kind of has begun a passion plea for me to be a part of this, but it's exciting stuff because you're interacting with, one, commerce, you're interacting what the nation's real security really is economically, and then how to work with partners, allies, basically the entire globe of making sure that free flow of trade is the international norm. And you can't beat that. And unfortunately, the business is really good in that regard right now, if you think about the world events going on. I was able to be an expeditionary strike group commander, so I commanded the largest strike group in our Navy in San Diego, about 10,000 sailors and Marines, 33 different ships, amphibious ships, and working through. And if you want to learn about supply chain, United States Marine Corps. And so you have a rucksack, you have a Marine, and you better sustain them. Because they're the best, right, in what they do. And so 7 days. And if you're later than 7 days, those batteries that Marine's carrying around in that rucksack, you better have a resupply. And so trying to do that, in a contested environment or in any environment, frankly, that's what we do. That's what your United States Navy and Marine Corps team does. So that job was incredibly important to me. And then I was down in Singapore as the task force commander I was the commander for Western Pacific logistics. So I was able to support the Pacific Fleet for all at-sea logistics in the Pacific. A pretty good job in that regard as well. And again, all the force flow, all those connection points that I was talking about. And also working with partners and allies, because I was stationed in Singapore as the senior U.S. military in Singapore. And so I got to work alongside the ambassador at that time to understand not just my role as the task force commander, but really the strategic role for the Indo-Pacific commander, but certainly for our national piece of things. Went to Transcom. I was the strategy and policy lead for U.S. Transportation Command, Scott Air Force Base. So I got to understand now not just the mechanics of how to, but now the policy, the strategy, the intersection between the Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, MARAD, the Maritime Administrator, their team, and then Congress. Because all of these things are enacted by legislation, law, making sure that, again, we move as one government at the sound of whatever call there is. And then coming to because I'm a component for Transcom, understanding that part of it from the headquarters piece, now coming to M.S.C, it was a natural fit. But probably the best fit of why is because for the first 33 years of my career, I was a consumer. And so I was one of those folks that assumed that I needed, beans and bullets and gas, right? And so, and all of a sudden we would make, have a schedule. They'd come along, our incredible mariners would come alongside, give us exactly what we need, and they would move on to the next one. And you really do just get used to that routine because that's how, incredibly efficient and effective we are. But I quickly understood as we started expanding and started understanding. And then, like you said, we have not kept in pace with some of the changes across the globe at the same speed. And so we're playing a little bit of catch up, but we're certainly catching up in the right time. As we're focusing on, again, sort of a America First, sort of mindset, America First for us obviously means a maritime nation. And so even from the beginning, 250 years ago, and the Merchant Marine was right alongside the Navy, 250 years ago when we went off and begun our first 6 frigates, but supporting the merchant fleet out there. And understanding the Barbary Pirates and understanding that entire beginning of both of our histories of the merchant fleet as well as the U.S. Navy fleet. And so it hasn't changed in 250 years, frankly. The ability to have that free flow of commerce, to extend, this maritime nation across the globe, frankly, for freedom of the seas, is incredibly important. And so, based on how we're looking at today's infrastructure in the U.S., the mariner shortage across the nation that we've been experiencing, and frankly across the globe has been affecting. And so now is the time, and I think that step change has happened, and probably even more important that it needs to happen for what international trade looks like in the future, but certainly where we sit on the globe stage.
What do you think it is that not many people even know what the Merchant Marine is or what it does? Why do you think that is such a lack of understanding there?
Well, it's assumed. I think part of it is we have this incredible supply chain across the U.S. and that's interdependent of the world supply chain. And we've gotten so good at understanding those supply chains because you can, just quickly get on your app and this afternoon you got something at your doorstep. And so and for that to happen, you just think about what that has to happen. You need to have a hub, you need to have a distribution plan, you need to come from wherever it originates from, which in some cases it's the U.S., some cases it's abroad. The only way you get from abroad, unless you want to fly everything, which you can't, the best way to do that is through sea commerce. It's assumed, frankly, for folks that live internal, to the coastlines, for more importantly. But if you think about, just looking at, if you look at a Long Beach or you look at, a harbor, New York Harbor or down in Norfolk, where we are, it truly just happens in the background. And it just happens in this incredible fashion that these professional mariners, day in, day out, they've got their segments, they've got their moves, and they're on station, on time, all the time, to make sure that our economy flows, the puts and takes of our economy. And it's an orchestration that, again, once I started really understanding it, it's amazing how it happens. And it's just something that I believe, understanding the mariner and what it takes to go to sea, from the Navy perspective, we've got Top Gun and, Tom Cruise and all those things that kind of give you an appreciation on sort of the high-end fight and what we do as, combat of arms for our Navy. The majority of the things at sea are not the combat arms. We're there just in case the nation calls. But day to day, as I mentioned, it's that $2.3 trillion that goes through the Red Sea in operations. It's the 5.3, closer to $6 trillion that goes through the Straits of Malacca. It's all those key factors in which keeps our economy alive, and without the mariner, it doesn't get there.
how important is it to educate our next generation on what
Yeah.
it is to be a maritime nation?
Yeah, no, incredibly important. And my good friend Andy Lennon, who runs the Sea Cadets, we need to have more understanding at the middle school level, high school level, and certainly in different college universities, trade schools, about what it means. Let's never forget that 9,521 mariners lost their lives during the convoys. And so for my granddad, who was fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, or the way he got to the fight, it was through the Merchant Marine. He was telling me stories about how he get on a cargo carrier, and he and plus a lot of people and his friends and frankly our family went with him, or his family, I'm sorry, his wife and my mom and her sister went with him on these big troop carriers. That's how they went to war. That's how they went to the European theater. And so on and on and on. The Merchant Marine has been a part of the fabric of what we're doing. Today, think about that every time you see in the news, the Harry S. Truman strike group, right? The Eisenhower strike group. Guess who's alongside of them? Every single day. And we're in the same place, in harm's way, doing a fabulous job, keeping resupply going and making sure, and they're keeping it in pace like nobody's business. So the Mariner today, has a rich, proud tradition that they get to, emulate. We've got incredible leadership across, the spectrum of our nation's leaders that have now begun really the focus on the maritime, from shipbuilding all the way to the supply chain that I talked about. We do have some catching up to do, but we are the country that catches up like nobody else. And I think we have focus now to be able to get after that. From the Navy perspective, on one side of my portfolio is that combat of arms part of it. In this job, it really is the intersection between that combat of arms and the commerce and the commercial sector, which we're seeing at the same time. So you think about where Congress is right now on the Ship for America or America Ship Act, thinking through about where the leaders in Congress are on making sure this maritime nation is understood, as well as positioned to scale the way that we need it to. And I think we're positioned to do just that, and not the first time in our nation's history. The 250 years, as you mentioned, has gone through different ways to where it was more important at other times, whether it's an energy crisis in the 80s all the way through to where we are. I think the wake-up call certainly was during the pandemic environment. It wasn't because of the pandemic, but it exposed the supply chain during the pandemic. And when we looked at port, stagnation, and it wasn't just shipping. It was, do we have the right cradles for the containers, and do we have the right stevedore and or the port ops type of things, and how do you load all of that? Because we have this incredible efficient model of supply chain, and when it's disrupted, I think we learn quickly, or maybe not so quickly, about how to adapt and overcome. Take a look at the current Red Sea. Again, the market and the economy, although there's a cost, there's no doubt, both opportunity costs as well as real costs for our carriers. But going around the Horn of Africa, we were able to adapt pretty quick. We were able to quickly work with our industry partners, talk through what's the risk, and then let our nation's security sort of support all of that. And we're seeing that over the last couple of years.
With AMMV helping to maintain the legacy of the World War II, it's an important thing to continue the legacy and honor, right?
No, absolutely. This organization it's so important. One, to bring friends and families together who are part of this veterans organization. Folks don't think about the Merchant Marine and a veteran in the same sentence necessarily, but just think about the service of going to sea in whatever time frame you went to sea. Anyone who's been to sea understands that's a service, and behind that, lots of sacrifice. And those families, those support networks that you leave behind, there's no different than what I've done for 36 years, and certainly what the Merchant Marine does. So these organizations, just like VFW, just like any other of these veterans organizations, are so impactful and powerful. What this can highlight, a film like this or an opportunity like this is you know, the same cloth that I wear is the same cloth that these merchant mariners wear. And so, and that's the nation's cloth. And so, keeping it alive, it's getting harder and harder. You know, we're down to the small numbers of World War II, and that was the greatest generation. And we've enjoyed those international norms for over 80 years now. It's time for us, our generation, and the ones that follow, to carry that mantle, and they're the next greatest generation. But the Merchant Marine has to be a part of that, just by de facto of what United States of America is all about.